The last component I'd like to mention is a very important one. If we wish to grow, the question is how much funding, how much financing will we need in order to be able to afford that growth? And for that, we need to talk about forecasting. Now, no one could really predict the future, of course, with accuracy, right? But a forecast attempt will allow you to ask some very important questions about, how realistic your assumptions about growth are, and very importantly, it helps you determine how much you'll need. And how much is very important because again, you don't want to be waiting till the very end until the brick falls on top of your head, right? And basically, that's when you are uh, struggling or trying to find sources of funding. And generally, when we are in that situation of urgency, the conditions under which we fund ourselves are not really the optimal ones. So it is best to be able to assess, identify that your needs ahead of time so that you can better prepare and negotiate the best possible terms. So there are various different approaches to doing this. The most simple one, straightforward one, is just to use a common size or a percentage of sales approach. So the justification is basically that sales drives a lot of the the changes in many of the financial statement items that we report. And so let's link these key items to revenue stream, to sales. And based on those relationships, we can forecast what potential needs we'll have in the future. So we first identify financial statements that are the most, and by the way, the least too, right? Affected by sales. That's step number one. Then we generate a sales forecast. And based on that sales forecast, we extrapolate the items that we are interested in forecasting. In the end, we're going to have a result, and that result always has to pass the test of, being reasonable, making sense. The numbers will tell you whatever you want them to tell you, right? But the fact is, are those numbers making sense? Is this a realistic approach? All right. Now, forecasting is one thing, but we're going to concentrate a little bit more on, forecasting the funding needs, right? We want to find out how much we need in order to fund a specific expected or planned growth. So this is what I'm going to suggest, and this is just a conceptual explanation. You will soon be exposed to a recording where I go in Excel and actually do this step by step. Okay. For now, just sit back and just basically enjoy the show in the sense of just conceptually understanding what we're after. So this is what we're going to do. In order to find the additional funding needed, we're going to first forecast the income statement and balance sheets. Okay, but in doing that, we're going to keep interest expense and all sorts of funding constant. Now, I know that it sounds unrealistic, but this is what we're doing. What we're forcing is the balance sheet to be at an imbalance. Because if you think about it, if you're forecasting growth, when you forecast growth, your assets have to change, and more likely, of course, will increase, right? Because you're going to have to spend more on maybe fixed assets, maybe inventory, all working capital components. So think of your total assets as having to change based on your growth assumptions. And the liability and equity side, as you may recall from the very first session recording, I said the liability and equity side shows you where the money is coming from. So if total assets grow, it must be that you have to find a way to fund that growth. But your liability and equity has to change. But what I'm going to suggest is that you keep in all interest expenses and sources of funding constant. When that happens, of course, there will be an imbalance in your balance sheet. And that imbalance is going to be classified as the additional funds or additional funding, financing that you need. All right, so we're going to purposely generate an imbalance and then use that information to tell us how much funding we need. So visually, this is what happens, right? If you want to grow, then assets, of course, have to reflect an increase. However, if you force the liabilities and equity, which are your sources of funding, to remain unaltered, unchanged, then you're going to generate an imbalance in the balance sheet. And that is the AFN. Okay? So that's the general idea. Now we're going to put that general idea to work using, as an example, the information that you are going to be working on as assignment number 1. So assignment number 1 has 6 different sheets. The first 5 sheets are the ones that you are responsible for submitting as your first assignment. Sheet number 6 is a template that I'm going to use right now to practice this this approach to finding the financing needed. All right. Of course, you are not responsible for submitting as assignment number 1 this additional funds needed, because it's something that we're going to do together through the video recordings. So, in summary, why are ratios important? They help us assess the financial health of a company, and ratios provide us with some of the inputs that we need for forecasting and growth estimation. Okay, so think about those 2 things. We've covered the ratio analysis as the use of assessing financial health, and with this forecast, you'll see that we'll use some of those relationships, those ratio relationships, as inputs in order to forecast a specific future balance sheet item.